Hello everybody, welcome to my channel.
Michael Caine. A life built on grit, craft, and charm. Michael Caine, one of Britain's most distinctive and enduring screen icons, stands as a testament to the power of persistence, authenticity, and unmistakable presence. Over a career spanning more than 6 decades, he has transformed himself from a working-class kid in post-war London into a 2-time Academy Award winner whose voice alone has become as recognizable as his face. Early life and breakthrough. Born Maurice Joseph Micklewhite Jr. in 1933 in London's Tough Elephant and Castle district, Caine's early years were marked by modest means and the upheaval of World War II. After national service in Korea, he returned home determined to pursue acting. Success didn't come quickly. He slogged through years of bit parts, low-budget films, and casting call rejections. Everything changed in the 1960s. His breakthrough role as Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead in Zulu, 1964, instantly signaled a new kind of British star: cool, sharp, and contemporary. He'd follow it up with a string of defining performances, including the blunt, charismatic Harry Palmer in The Ipcress File, 1965, and the suave, freewheeling Alfie Elkins in Alfie, 1966. A role that earned him his first Oscar nomination and cemented him as a leading man of the era. Defining versatility. Caine's specialty has always been versatility. He could play streetwise and suave, gentle and menacing, comedic and tragic, often in the same decade. Films like Get Carter, 1971, and The Man Who Would Be King, 1975, showcased a performer who could shift seamlessly between action, drama, and adventure. By the 1980s and 1990s, he moved into a new phase of his career, the seasoned veteran. His supporting roles were often scene-stealing, and his performances became sharply refined, including an Oscar-winning turn in Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters, 1986. A resurgence for new generations. Caine's renaissance in the 2000s introduced him to entire new generations. Christopher Nolan cast him as a moral anchor in Batman Begins, 2005. Reinventing Alfred Pennyworth as warm, wise, and deeply human. He continued that collaboration in The Prestige, 2006, Inception, 2010, and Interstellar, 2014. To younger audiences, he became both a mentor figure and a symbol of old-school gravitas. He won his second Oscar for The Cider House Rules, 1999, proving that even late in a long career, he still had new layers to reveal. Legacy and retirement. Caine officially announced his retirement from acting in 2023 after the release of The Great Escaper. By then, his legacy was secure. More than 160 film credits, countless cultural touchstones, and a voice often imitated but never replicated. Beyond his films, he's known for his self-effacing humor, his honesty about class and ambition, and his status as one of Britain's great working-class success stories. He's also an author of several memoirs and novels, sharing stories with the same direct charm that defines his acting. An indelible presence. Michael Caine's career isn't just long. It's layered, influential, and filled with characters who linger long after the credits roll. From Harry Palmer to Alfred Pennyworth, he consistently brought truth, warmth, and sly charisma to every frame. He may be retired, but his imprint on cinema is permanent. And in true Caine fashion, he did it his own way, without ever losing the spark that made him unforgettable in the first place. A deeper look at the man behind the legend. Michael Caine's journey from South London council estates to worldwide fame is more than a career arc. It's the kind of story that becomes folklore. Born Maurice Micklewhite Jr., he grew up during the Blitz, often recalling how the air raid sirens and strict rationing shaped his sense of resilience. His father worked at the Billingsgate Fish Market, and his mother was a charwoman, grounding him firmly in Britain's working-class culture. Those roots became central to his screen identity. An everyman with sharp edges, humor, and heart. Finding his way into acting when Caine first set his sights on acting, the odds were stacked against him. The British stage and screen industry was dominated by well-educated performers with polished accents. Caine's naturally broad Cockney voice was considered a barrier. But he refused to mask who he was. His voice eventually became his superpower, immediately setting him apart and opening the door for a new kind of British leading man. Before fame, he did everything from filing clerical papers to stagehand work. His time in the Korean War left him with a deep sense of mortality and, according to Caine, made him appreciate life in a new, ferocious way. When he returned to London, he attacked acting with a seriousness that belied his easygoing persona. The era-defining roles of the 60s and 70s, the 1960s, were Caine's rocket ride. After Zulu, he became the face of a fresh, modern British cinema that wanted not aristocrats but real people. He became iconic almost overnight with Harry Palmer, the bespectacled spy who was the gritty alternative to James Bond. Dry wit, cold realism, no nonsense. Alfie Elkins, the smooth-talking charmer whose womanizing collapses under the weight of its consequences. Charlie Croker in The Italian Job, 1969. Delivering one of cinema's most quoted lines with a perfectly timed glint in his eye. Caine was more than cool. He was relatable, cheeky, and quietly emotional. His performances were never fussy. He made it look effortless. The 1970s expanded his range. In Get Carter, 1971, he delivered a chilly, controlled performance as a gangster seeking brutal revenge. In Sleuth, 1972, he matched Laurence Olivier beat for beat in a dueling actor masterclass. A career with peaks, dips, and a lot of risk-taking, Caine is famously candid about taking roles for money. Joking that he never saw Jaws, The Revenge, but he did see the house it bought him. Not every film was a masterpiece, but even his less acclaimed projects gave him chances to stretch himself. And his professional work ethic became legendary. He rarely phoned in a performance. Even in flawed films, Caine delivered something watchable. By the 1980s, he re-established himself with power and nuance. His role in Educating Rita, 1983, showed a softer, more introspective side. His Oscar-winning turn in Hannah and Her Sisters, 1986, balanced internal conflict, warmth, and vulnerability. The 90s to 2010s. The reinvention the 1990s marked his transformation into elder statesman. The Cider House Rules won him his second Oscar and revealed a deep well of gentleness. Then came Christopher Nolan, who essentially made Michael Caine the emotional spine of a new generation's blockbusters. As Alfred, Caine grounded the Batman trilogy in loyalty, moral clarity, and heartbreaking sincerity. His trembling voice in The Dark Knight Rises remains one of his most affecting moments. In Inception, he was the moral compass. In Interstellar, the enigmatic scientist. In The Prestige, the pragmatic engineer who saw the human cost behind illusions. Nolan said he wrote many roles with Caine's voice in mind because he represents both trust and gravitas. Craft and philosophy. Caine's acting philosophy, documented in his memoirs and his book Acting in Film, is simple: hit your mark. Don't blink unnecessarily. Tell the truth. Serve the scene, not your ego. He stripped away pretension and made acting feel human and direct. His casual charm hid a meticulous sense of timing, especially in comedy. He also became a symbol of humility in fame. He often joked that he was never a star so much as a working actor who worked a lot. A personal life kept steady. Caine married Shakira Bash in 1973 after seeing her in a Maxwell House coffee commercial and tracking her down. Their marriage became one of the most admired in show business. And Caine often spoke about how she grounded him and saved him from the hard-drinking lifestyle he'd slipped into at the height of his fame. Off-screen, he's known as warm, witty, and sharply observant. Friends describe him as loyal and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone with his cultural footprint. His retirement and final bow. When Caine announced his retirement after The Great Escaper, 2023, it felt like the end of an era. Even in his 90s, his performance was tender, sharp, and emotionally rich. He wasn't slowing down, he was finishing strong. "I've had a long run," he said, "and I've said everything I want to say." An influence that runs deep. Few actors have been mimicked as often, quoted as lovingly, or celebrated as widely. He opened doors for working-class performers. He showed that authenticity could be its own form of elegance. His characters were never just roles. They were reflections of real, complicated people. Michael Caine's legacy sits comfortably alongside the greatest actors in film history. Not because he chased perfection, but because he brought humanity to everything he touched. His humor, heart, and unmistakable voice made him unforgettable. A career that mirrored the evolution of modern cinema. Michael Caine's trajectory is woven through nearly every major shift in global filmmaking from the 1960s onward. His career didn't just survive the changing tastes of audiences. It adapted, reflected, and sometimes even shaped them. In the 60s, he helped break the mold of what a British leading man should look like. The era's most respected actors still came from the stage, trained in declamation and formal delivery. Caine arrived with a casual ease, a naturalistic rhythm, and a modern accent that aligned with the cultural upheaval of the decade. Britain was transforming, and he became one of its new faces. By the 70s, Hollywood had embraced grittier realism, and Caine's style fit the moment. His performances in Get Carter and The Man Who Would Be King resonated with audiences hungry for flawed heroes and morally complex stories. In the 80s and 90s, he evolved again. He stepped into the role of mentor, professor, doctor, father figure, detective, and confidant. His characters gained warmth, nuance, and introspection, reflecting a maturing performer who no longer needed to win the room through bravado. His presence became steadier, more grounded. When Caine appeared on screen, you trusted him. By the 2000s and 2010s, he was cinema's moral anchor. Nolan used his persona masterfully, positioning him as the emotional bedrock of sprawling, ambitious narratives. Caine brought humanity to spectacle, lending even massive blockbusters an emotional pulse. Without him, the scale might have swallowed the sentiment. The signature traits that defined a Michael Caine performance. Fans and actors alike often point to the core elements of Caine's acting identity. 1. The voice, not merely the accent. The cadence. The clipped clarity. The observational dryness. His lines often landed like quiet truths rather than theatrical announcements. 2. The eyes. He famously advised actors not to blink on camera because the audience trusts you when you don't blink. Whether or not he always followed this rule, his gaze carried a kind of unforced authority. 3. Emotional accessibility. Caine never overplayed. Even in tense scenes, his emotional beats were remarkably subtle. A small shift in his expression often said more than a monologue could. 4. Honesty. He once said the job is to show people what truth looks like. He avoided melodrama, chasing grounded, natural choices. This is why his characters felt like real people rather than glorified archetypes. Caine's cultural impact. More than an actor, Michael Caine became part of the cultural lexicon. His voice inspired thousands of impressions. His catchphrases became memes long before memes existed. His lines from The Italian Job and Alfie are quoted by people who haven't even seen the films. Beyond the jokes, his path opened doors. For decades, working-class British actors struggled to break into film without altering their accent or identity. Caine's success didn't erase class barriers, but it cracked them enough for later performers like Gary Oldman, Tom Hardy, and Michael Fassbender to follow without apology. He also defined a certain kind of British masculinity. Witty without smugness, confident without cruelty, emotional without losing face. His characters weren't perfect, but they were deeply human. A prolific author and storyteller, Caine's charm and clarity translated naturally into writing. His memoirs are rich with behind-the-scenes anecdotes, self-deprecating humor, and sharp reflections on the nature of fame and craft. He also wrote novels, tackling fiction with the same curiosity he brought to acting. His books about acting remain staples for young performers because they demystify the craft. Where some instructors rely on theory, Caine leaned into practicality. Shaped by decades of working on chaotic sets, rushed schedules, and wildly different directors. Accolades and honors across his career, Caine earned 2 Academy Awards, BAFTAs, Golden Globes, a knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II in 2000. But he often joked that the awards were nice, though the real victory was simply getting paid to do something I'd have done for free. It's a bit of an exaggeration, of course, but it captures the heart of his persona: gracious, unpretentious, and deeply grateful for a life he once thought impossible. A retirement that feels like a curtain call. Not an ending. When he stepped away from acting, he did it with a sense of peace. His final performances revealed no decline in skill. If anything, he seemed more connected than ever to the emotional realities of age, memory, loss, and legacy. He leaves behind a body of work that spans thrillers, comedies, dramas, epics, blockbusters, independent films, stage plays, and television. More importantly, he leaves behind a sense of character, both on and off the screen. Michael Caine is one of those rare performers whose name alone evokes an entire era of film. Not many careers get that kind of weight. The globalization of his stardom. Michael Caine became one of the earliest British actors to transition seamlessly into international fame. In the 1960s and 70s, most UK stars tended to remain national treasures rather than global ones. Caine crossed oceans, genres, and markets with almost strange ease. Part of this came from his style. American audiences instantly understood him. He didn't carry the stiff formality that defined traditional British performers. He was sharp, modern, a little dangerous, and a little funny. He felt like a person you might meet in a pub, but also someone capable of taking on the world. It didn't hurt that his characters often embodied a certain aspirational swagger. In a changing global culture, Caine was the man who looked at tradition, nodded politely, and then walked right past it. His distinct relationship with stardom. A lot of actors chase stardom. Caine didn't seem particularly interested in the chase. It's part of what made him charming. He never cultivated mystery. He didn't manipulate the press. He didn't perform a persona outside his films. He was simply himself, bluntly honest and occasionally mischievous. A few examples of the Caine mindset. When asked why he made so many movies, he said he'd grown up poor and the idea of saying no to work felt unnatural. When criticized for taking roles in weaker films, he'd shrug and say, "I've never regretted a check." When people teased his accent, he'd remind them that millions of people sounded like him, and that they deserved someone who represented them on screen. This lack of pretense didn't diminish his stature. It enhanced it. Collaborations that defined his journey. Caine worked with dozens of iconic directors, and several of those relationships shaped entire chapters of his life. Christopher Nolan essentially made Caine the patron saint of emotional gravity. Through Nolan's films, Caine evolved from actor to symbol. Audiences learned that when he showed up, the story suddenly had heart. Nolan later said Caine was the closest thing to a lucky charm I have. John Huston, the man who would be king, forged a powerful partnership. Huston saw in Caine an actor with both humor and dignity, a perfect match for the film's adventurous spirit. Lewis Gilbert. 3 collaborations, including Educating Rita, helped position Caine in roles that required emotional vulnerability rather than flash. Guy Ritchie. Decades after his early crime films, Caine returned to the British underworld in Ritchie's King Arthur universe and Harry Brown, which felt like a spiritual echo of his younger anti-heroes. Older but unbroken. Phases of the Caine persona. To understand Caine's career, it helps to break him into eras. Each era had its own energy, impact, and defining roles. 1. The Cockney breakout, 1960s, cool, confident, effortlessly modern. He was the face of a generational shift. 2. The tough professional, 1970s, sharper, more cynical roles. Caine channeled a world weariness that matched the era's darker storytelling. 3. The mature craftsman, 1980s, a period of rediscovery, blending humor, intellect, and emotional warmth. Awards and prestige followed. 4. The elder statesman, 1990s to 2000s, he embraced his age gracefully. Wise mentor roles suited him perfectly, and filmmakers leaned on his natural authority. 5. The iconic presence, 2010s–2023, at this stage, Caine wasn't just an actor in a film. He carried with him decades of cinematic memory. His mere appearance added richness. He became mythic while still feeling real. His influence on modern acting. Young actors often cite Michael Caine when discussing naturalism. Part of his influence came from his ability to cut through the clutter of overacting, overly dramatic gesture, or actorly behavior. He taught stillness over spectacle, honesty over flourish, listening over performing. His acting book remains popular because it strips the craft to its bones. No mysticism, no complicated exercises, just practical wisdom learned on sets from London to Los Angeles. The private Michael Caine. Despite his fame, Caine kept his private life remarkably clean and steady. His marriage to Shakira Bash lasted more than 50 years. A feat almost unheard of in show business. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and stability. When Caine reduced his drinking in the 1970s, he credited Shakira with saving his life. Fatherhood. Caine has 2 daughters, and often said fatherhood grounded him more than fame ever could. Even at the height of his celebrity, he prioritized family. Friendships. He maintained close friendships with actors like Sean Connery, Roger Moore, and Terence Stamp. These were not superficial industry connections. They were lifelong bonds forged through shared struggles and early ambitions. The philosophy you can hear between his lines. Michael Caine's worldview was shaped by hardship, war, working-class sensibilities, and decades of observing human nature. His interviews are filled with quiet wisdom, such as, "Be like a duck, calm on the surface, paddling like hell underneath. When you're young, you act to be famous. When you're old, you act because you love it. The secret to a long career is, don't retire and don't die." His humor softened his harsher truths, but those truths came from real life. The final image. Michael Caine's retirement created a cinematic void few actors have. His longevity, his versatility, his cultural weight, his relatability, his iconic voice, his seamless reinvention, his effortless sense of humanity. He represents a style of acting that felt natural yet grounded in craft. He represents a kind of fame built on work rather than image. And he represents a generation of performers who shaped modern cinema from the inside. Michael Caine didn't chase greatness. He just kept working until greatness eventually caught up with him. How Michael Caine reframed British identity on screen. Before Caine, British cinema largely projected a narrow image of Britishness. Refined accents, formal demeanor, Oxbridge polish. The gritty reality of working-class London rarely made it to the big screen in leading roles. Caine changed that dynamic almost single-handedly. He showed audiences that a British hero could come from Elephant and Castle, not Eaton Square. His characters didn't apologize for their background or hide it. Instead, they wore it openly, even proudly. This shift lined up with the wider cultural moment of the 60s, when Britain was breaking away from rigid class expectations and redefining its identity through fashion, music, film, and literature. Actors like Albert Finney, Terence Stamp, and Tom Courtenay were part of that movement too, but Caine became the most global symbol of it. He became proof that talent didn't require privilege. The psychology behind his characters across 6 decades, Caine's characters often shared certain psychological patterns, even as their circumstances varied wildly. 1. Cool exterior, hidden vulnerability. Caine rarely played men who wore their emotions on the surface. His characters often presented as confident, even cocky, but carried emotional wounds underneath. This tension kept them textured and unpredictable. 2. A sense of moral complexity. Even in his heroic roles, Caine avoided moral simplicity. His characters expressed doubt, temptation, fear, or ambiguity. That realism made them relatable. 3. Intellectual street savviness. Many of his most memorable roles combined book-smart insight with street-smart instincts. Harry Palmer was the perfect example. A tough spy who could talk literature while handling a firearm. 4. Loneliness. A quiet through line in many performances, especially later in his career, was a sense of isolated dignity. Roles in Educating Rita, The Quiet American, and Harry Brown showman living with regret or distance, trying to find connection. These emotional layers helped give his characters an interior life that felt unforced and human. His anecdote-rich journey through Hollywood. Michael Caine's Hollywood stories are the stuff of legend. He became friends with Frank Sinatra, spent evenings with John Wayne, partied with the Rolling Stones, traded jokes with Peter Sellers, and collaborated with Laurence Olivier. He navigated these wildly different worlds with an ease that surprised even him. Despite being surrounded by titans, he never seemed intimidated. He always approached people as equals, which probably explains why he got along with nearly everyone. His memoirs are filled with stories of surreal nights at star-studded gatherings, each told with humor and humility. His reinvention in later life. Reinvention is rare in Hollywood, especially for older actors. But Caine managed several second winds. The 1980s Renaissance. After a run of mixed films in the 70s, he reasserted his brilliance with Educating Rita and Hannah and Her Sisters. Both films reminded audiences that beneath the charm was a heavyweight dramatic actor. The Nolan era. When Christopher Nolan brought Caine into the fold around 2005, it was a turning point. Caine wasn't just acting in blockbusters, he was shaping them. Nolan used him with surgical precision, a grounding presence, a voice of reason, a tie to emotional stakes. Caine's scenes weren't long, but they were always impactful, often delivering the moral heart of the film. His approach to directing styles. Caine collaborated with all kinds of directors, From improvisational creatives to meticulous planners, his adaptability was one of his secret strengths. With Woody Allen, he absorbed a rhythm based on neurotic comedy and internal conflict. With John Frankenheimer, he learned the choreography of tension. With Brian De Palma, he handled operatic suspense. With Nolan, he mastered the mechanic precision of blockbuster architecture. He often said that the trick to working well with directors was simple: do your job and don't try to direct the movie for them. His unusual relationship with fame and money. Caine grew up poor. Real poverty, not symbolic poverty. This shaped his attitude toward money for the rest of his life. He never apologized for taking well-paid roles in mediocre films. To him, financial security was a form of emotional security. It meant he would never return to the instability of his youth. He often joked about his paycheck films, but behind the humor was a worldview formed by hardship. He never looked down on commercial work. Instead, he took pride in being employed, dependable, and versatile. In a strange way, his decision to do every kind of film strengthened his longevity. Audiences never got bored of him. He kept showing up, shifting slightly, adapting constantly. A legacy that goes beyond film. Caine's influence extends into many corners of culture. In fashion, his 1960s style helped shape the mod movement. Thin ties, sharp suits, clean lines, understated cool. He dressed in a way that suggested confidence without flash. In voice and comedy, his voice became one of the most impersonated in the world. Even comedians who weren't British found themselves mimicking his cadence. His way of delivering lines has become a comedic template. In British social identity, he became a symbol of social mobility. A reminder that talent could overcome class barriers. A living contradiction to centuries of British hierarchy. In literature and writing, his memoirs inspired countless actors who didn't see themselves reflected in traditional training books. His writing was practical, clear, and generous. The future of his legacy. Michael Caine's films will remain staples of movie history for decades. But his legacy will also continue through young actors embracing authenticity, filmmakers prioritizing emotional honesty within spectacle, audiences valuing grounded performances, cultural commentators exploring the evolution of British identity. He showed that greatness could come from anywhere. You didn't need lineage, privilege, or polish. You needed truth, grit, and a bit of daring. In that sense, Michael Caine is more than a legendary actor. He is a blueprint. The endurance of Michael Caine's appeal. One reason Michael Caine's career lasted so long is that audiences never got tired of watching him. Some actors burn bright then fade. Caine simmered, shifted, evolved, and re-emerged. His endurance came partly from talent, partly from adaptability, and partly from something harder to define. He always felt accessible. There was no celebrity wall between him and the public. His persona wasn't aspirational in a distant way. He wasn't mythic like Brando, mercurial like Pacino, or technical like Hopkins. Instead, he felt like someone you could speak to in an elevator and actually get a decent conversation out of. This accessibility made him timeless. He never carried the intimidating aura of a legend, even though he was one. The international versus British Michael Caine. There are actually two Michael Caines in cultural memory, depending on where you're watching from. In Britain, he's a national figure, a symbol of upward mobility, a working-class success story who never forgot his accent or where he came from. Someone who broke barriers simply by being himself. You hear his voice and it feels woven into the fabric of British pop culture, like the Beatles or Monty Python. In the United States, he's the consummate chameleon. A respected actor whose filmography maps the last 60 years of cinema. Americans often know him from his Oscar roles, from Nolan, from The Italian Job, from Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and from his crime classics. They see him as one of those actors who elevates any film he enters. Globally, he's the recognizable voice of wisdom. That voice alone became a kind of cinematic comfort food. Caine's craft, the technical side people often miss behind the relaxed presence, was a highly technical performer. Caine understood the camera, angles, lenses, and framing better than many directors. Some of the techniques he advocated: 1. You don't act with your face. You act with your eyes. This idea shaped generations of film actors. Caine understood that the camera picks up micro-emotions that stage acting might mask. 2. Stillness as power. He found that if he remained physically still, he had more control over the scene. Less movement meant the audience came to him rather than him reaching for the audience. 3. Hitting marks precisely. He treated technical precision as a form of respect. Crew members loved him for it. Directors valued it because it meant shots didn't have to be redone unnecessarily. 4. Listening. Most actors focus on their lines. Caine emphasized listening, true reactions, minimal effort, authentic presence. 5. Efficiency. He worked fast, rarely needed extra takes. This made him ideal for big budget sets where delays cost millions. The emotional archetypes he played across his career. If you map his characters over time, you find recurring emotional archetypes that show how he aged into different kinds of roles. The young rebel, 1960s, confident, sharp-edged, irresistible. The charisma of possibility. The cool professional, 1970s, more controlled, more cynical. A man hardened by life's bruises. The complicated mentor, 1980s, warm but flawed. A mix of wisdom and vulnerability. The father figure or moral anchor, 1990s to 2000s, steady, wise, emotionally open. Capable of delivering the quiet truth at the story's center. The elder sphinx, 2010s-2023, a symbolic presence. A character whose value lies in what he represents. Legacy, memory, and a link to the past. Not many actors make this many transitions without losing relevance. Caine did it instinctively. The importance of humor in his career. Caine's comedic timing is a huge part of his success. Comedy kept him alive in the public consciousness during career lulls and gave him range.
Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Bye.